Good morning, everyone. Good job. So our speaker this morning should be no stranger to you all. This will be his third time speaking to us, which means that I guess we liked him the first two times. Ted Reinstein is best known in New England as a journalist and reporter for Chronicle, Boston's celebrated and America's longest-running locally produced TV news magazine. While he appears occasionally in the studio at the anchor desk or delivering an opinion commentary, it's out in the field where viewers are most familiar seeing Ted. From every corner of New England, he found the offbeat, the unique, the moving, and just plain memorable, all while telling the enduring, colorful stories of the region's people and places. Ted has also been a regular contributor to WCVB's political roundtable show, On the Record, and has been a member of the station's editorial board since 2010. In 2002, he was part of a Chronicle team which received a National DuPont Columbia Broadcast Journalism Award for coverage of Boston's controversial Big Dig, and how such massive public works projects compare around the world. In 2018, he received an Emmy Award for his story on the Good Night Lights phenomenon in Providence, Rhode Island. Elsewhere on television, Ted hosted the premiere season of the Discovery Channel's popular mechanics show and brought viewers up close to some of America's most iconic landmarks for the HGTV network special Lighthouses. For the Travel Channel's photo adventure series Freeze Frame, he explored Hawaii's volcanoes, the caves of Puerto Rico, and the South Pacific island of Tahiti. His first book, A New England Notebook, One Reporter, Six States, Uncommon Stories, was selected by National Geographic Traveler as a best pick. He's also the author of Wicked Pissed, New England's Most Famous Feuds, and co-author with his wife, Anne-Marie Dorning, of New England's General Stores, Exploring an American Classic. One of Ted's most recent books is Before Brooklyn, The Unsung Heroes Who Helped Break Baseball Color Barrier. Ted received his bachelor's and master's degree from Brandeis University and has two daughters and lives just west of Boston. I think if he's here any more times, he's going to write a book about us. A third-time visitor to us here at the Brotherhood and speaking to us this morning on his latest book, Travels Through the Hearts and Souls of New England, Stories of Struggles, Resilience, and Triumph. Please give a warm Brotherhood welcome to Ted Reinstein.
Thank you very much, Stu. Actually, if you just substitute the heart and soul of New England, it could be Beth M. Framingham, Stories of Struggle, Resilience, and Triumph, right? Of course, that could go for most congregations all over. But no, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Stu. Thank you, Stu, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be back here for, yes, my third time. Which is great. And as I know I've said this before, but I do a lot of speaking throughout the year all over. But anytime, and this is, I think the last time I spoke to a temple congregation was, what, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, with Before Brooklyn. It's a special treat, because it's like the difference between speaking anywhere, which I enjoy anyway, but this is always like speaking to Mishpacha. So there's a difference, right? I mean, it's like you get certain things, and I love that. So I'm going to talk to you, as Stu said, about my most recent book. And I describe this book often as a love song to New England, which I have reported all around now for, soon it'll be 30 years. And then I will say goodnight. But it's a long time. Every corner of New England. And while the places all around New England are familiar to me, it's the people that are really at the core of the stories that I do. I mean, mountains don't talk, right? But fishermen do. And while the places and the photography with Chronicle is always wonderful, it's the people and their stories that have stayed with me, and that's why I wanted to do this book, because all of the people that I will be sharing with you today and all of their stories, these are people that have stayed with me. These are people who have, in many cases, in fact, virtually in the case of every person that I'm sharing with you today, these are people that have stayed a part of my life, which is not the case with every story you do, or you'd have no time to live your regular life. But these are people who became genuinely friends of mine, who I stay in touch with, every single one of the people I'm sharing with you. And that's what makes this project special for me. It's why I wanted to do this. Because of people like this, all of whom, those you'll meet today. And you know, if you have ever seen any of my travel pieces for Chronicle, you may be familiar with the fact that I almost always visit a diner. And I visit diners not because I like to eat. I mean, who doesn't like to eat? But diners, to me, and for many who feel their true value, diners are not about the food any more than general stores are about what they sell on their shelves. I always say, you know, you can get the same thing any diner serves anywhere. You can order off of Amazon any single item any general store in the world sells. But there is something that every single real authentic general store and every single authentic diner have that you can't get anywhere else, and that's actually priceless. And that is my favorite word, and it's exemplified by what I'm looking out at right now: community. Bingo. Community. Diners represent community. Diners are community gathering places, just like general stores, just like public libraries, just like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. They are communities. They are what we call third places in American life, right? The first place being home, family, the second place being work, and the third is really where the community magic happens. These are third places in American life. They are community gathering places. Every one of these people has something to do. Every story I'm going to share with you has something to do with a sense of community. Lose that, and we lose a sense of being where we've chosen to be. That's what makes where we've chosen to be something that is worth getting up to every single day. And in terms of diners, I will also be sharing a couple of my favorite diner stories that are also part of that same narrative. So the book is actually called, as I joked, Stories of Struggle, Resilience, and Triumph. So I'm going to break this talk up for the next 45, 50 minutes into those three areas of struggle, resilience, and triumph, and give you a few examples of stories that kind of exemplify what that is, like struggle. You know, struggle, sometimes struggles are big, struggles are small. Sometimes struggles are about preserving an entire way of life. And that is absolutely the case with fishing in New England. I have done dozens of stories over the years about the fishing industry. Gloucester specifically. Gloucester, as you know, is America's oldest, America's most storied seaport. It is also the seaport that has struggled the most, lost the most, struggled the most. And it all begins 50, 55 years ago now with the, look, some change would have happened anyway. There's no industry that's immune from that, right, including television. Some change would have happened anyway. What's happened in Gloucester, and Gloucester's not alone, but Gloucester is the place I know best, is the rules and regulations that were put into place about 50, 55 years ago by the federal government in an attempt that we can well understand, right? In an attempt to help stop the slide and of the cod stock, basically, the cod fishery in New England. And so these rules and regulations put into place, I know you know what they are. You know, I'm not going into the politics of it. I'm not going into the data of it. I'm not qualified. But whether or not those rules and regulations are being productive and successful is not for me to say. And in fact, right now, the data is not yet there to even say definitively one way or the other. What is definitive is how the rules and regulations have affected the community of Gloucester. It has devastated it. It has devastated it because fishing for 300-400 years was what made Gloucester what it is, and it was what put people to work. And fishing has been decimated in Gloucester. Most fishing today in Gloucester is done off of what we call corporate boats. These are boats that are owned by one or more investors. Sometimes there are more than multiple boats, right? Such a term, such a thing didn't exist 100 years ago, never mind 200, right? All fishing in Gloucester was done off of family-owned fishing boats. These boats and the knowledge, more importantly, that went with them was handed down through multiple generations. It is estimated that in 1900, there were almost 2,500 family-owned fishing boats in Gloucester. Not a single corporate boat because that didn't exist yet. 2,500, 1900. In 1970, it was estimated that number was down to about 1,200. Last year, 2023, we know for a fact, we don't have to estimate, that number was down to 79 boats. So that's disappearing. The notion of families being able to stay at fishing and hand down both a boat and the knowledge that goes with it is vanishing. It may be gone in a decade. That is certainly the case for Joe Sanfilippo. I've known Joe for years. Joe is now 5 generations of fishing in Gloucester. Was forced to abandon it about 10 years ago, simply couldn't make it work economically. It's punishing. It's punishing. And it's a difficult thing, you know, because you want to support the science behind it. You want to support the science that says, if we continue to overfish, there will not be a codfish left in the Gulf of Maine, right? That's happened in Newfoundland. Gone. The fishery's gone in Newfoundland, right? So the same thing is probably happening in the North Atlantic waters off of New England, but it became too punishing for too many people to stay with it, right? They have what they call these rolling closures. These are the worst. The rolling closures, sometimes, you know, a guy like Joe, you know, his phone will ping at, 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's announced that, say, a prime fishing ground like Stellwagen Bank or parts of George's Bank have been closed off for the next day for haddock, cod, and mackerel, let's say. He's baited up for cod and mackerel. He's got a crew that's set to arrive at the dock in 3 hours. Not happening. He's got to release the crew. He's got to pay them for the 4 days they're going to miss. He's going to lose the bait that he's already got on ice, which can cost thousands of dollars. And he's got kids. He's got a mortgage. You can't keep doing that. You cannot keep doing that. What kind of a business model is that, right? What kind of a business model is that? So he was driven out of it. He counts hundreds of friends who've been driven out of it. He is still at least on the water. He's one of the lucky ones because they all love the water. He is the captain of the Beauport, which is off his shoulder right there, which is a cruise boat. Cruises around Gloucester Harbor, says he misses fishing every day. But his bigger concern is not about himself and not about the fact that he's no longer fishing. Not about the fact that there won't be any boat to hand down to his kids, right? He learned to fish when he was 12 years old, crewing for his older brother, Ricky, right? His older brother learned to fish from their dad. Their dad learned to fish from their grandfather. Their grandfather learned to fish from their great-grandfather. That's how it went. Joe's concern now is that even if people are able ultimately to come back to fishing, what if nobody knows how to fish? That was always taken for granted. That was always taken for granted. You learn how to fish when you're 5 years old. You learn how to mend a net when you're 5 years old. Kids used to sit around on weekends, especially in Gloucester. You'd see pictures of it. You can find pictures online. Group of kids just sitting around, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're repairing nets for their dad, for their grandfather. That knowledge is crucial. You don't have a net, you're not going to be able to pick up a fish, right? Who's going to know how to mend a net? That's the least of it. So what Joe has done to me in terms of facing a struggle is that he has done something that is either entirely quixotic and will mean nothing over time because it will be moot, or it is one person standing in the breach and saying, this won't help me, but I'm going to do something for the legacy that I grew up with, which is to know how to fish. So he has started what I describe it as night school for fishing. There's no other. Listen, you know, as I said, people in Gloucester learn to fish generationally. If that pipeline of knowledge dries up completely, then where does the knowledge come from? You don't go to a community college and take fishing 101. You don't buy a book on Amazon, you know, fishing for dummies. There's no such thing, right? So he teaches this now. He teaches his students are men, women, older, younger. None of them own a commercial fishing boat. None of them have a license. None of them will be fishing commercially next year, the year after. Who knows? 5 years? Who knows? That's not his point. The point is, if and when, then someone will have to be able to teach people how to fish because the generations before them will not be doing that. So that's what he does. And that's what he does. That's what he's doing. He's now teaching people the simple, fundamental how to mend a net. Then there will be more knowledge to teach. Where do you fish? What is Stellwagen Bank? How long does it take to get there? What kind of boat will you need? What kind of fuel does it take? How do you maintain a large inboard commercial fishing boat engine? All of that will come later. But I love the fact that he is facing a struggle. And even though the odds seem against him, he's standing in the breach. So sometimes the struggle, as we know only too well, like when we get up in the morning, the struggle can be physical. One of the stories that I think of when I think about somebody facing a physical struggle and keep going through that struggle is Louis Escobar. We lost Louis 2 years ago now, but he was a very successful farmer in Rhode Island. You may know that Rhode Island is a very, very small state. Generally, there's not a lot of room to farm in Rhode Island, and even more rare. So most farming today in Rhode Island is turf farming, right? They grow grass, literally, not cannabis. They grow grass. You've seen them, right? I love it. They grow grass, and you don't need a lot of room. A guy told me once, I need 3.5 acres. 3.5 acres, I can stay in business, because with 3.5 acres of grass, I got plenty of grass to service dozens and dozens of small suburban postage stamp lawns. And you know, it's like carpet. They grow it, they cut it, they roll it up, they roll it out, they install it just like a carpet, right? Except you got to water it, right? But that's what most of the farming is in Rhode Island, because you don't need a lot of room. Louis was a rarity. He was a dairy farmer. You need room to dairy farm. You have to herd and graze cows, right? So he did that. He was very successful. He started a cooperative in Rhode Island with the other 3 small dairy farms in Rhode Island. But about 21 years ago, Louis had a terrible accident on the farm. His tractor fell on him. And if you survive that, which he did, you're going to be hurt bad. And he was. He was left a quadriplegic to live and work in a wheelchair. But he said, I never, ever for a minute thought of giving up farming. It's what I do. It's what my father did. It's what my grandfather did. It's what I do. I'll find a way to do it. That is struggle. That is facing struggle. He got himself outfitted with this high-powered electric wheelchair with these big, thick, fat tire things on it. When I met him about 5 years ago, he said he'd been through already 5.5 sets of tires, just tools around that farm. And I'll tell you something, it's a very humbling experience, seriously, to find yourself trotting behind a guy in a wheelchair that you can't keep up with. And his whole day was like that. He said he felt more productive after the accident than he felt before. I said, how could that be? Seriously. He said, simple. I never had to plan. Got up at 4 a.m, do whatever the hell I'm going to do. I don't feel like feeding him right now. I'll feed him later. And I didn't have that option, that luxury anymore of time. I had to plan like a teacher. I had to have a plan for the next day. Never did that. So now I felt more productive. Sometimes the struggle, as any good journalist will tell you, is simply about getting the story out. A story that people may benefit from, a story that may have a really wonderful life and person and achievement behind it that people simply don't know about. And the struggle is getting it out. And Jerry Ann Boggess exemplifies that at so many levels for me. First of all, she exemplifies the immigrant experience in America, which we all, 100% of us, are the immigrant experience, except those who go back 5,000 or 6,000 years. But Jerry Ann immigrated from Jamaica in the early 1970s. She immigrated to New Hampshire. She immigrated to the small town of Milford, New Hampshire, which is about 12 miles west of Nashville. very southern New Hampshire, raised a couple of great boys there, went on to college in New Hampshire. And Jerry Ann is a born journalist, even though that's not what she does professionally. But she is somebody who is comfortable with going through data. She's comfortable ferreting out facts. She's an incredible researcher. She would have made a great detective. She leaves no stone unturned when she is laser guided on a story. And when she moved to Milford, it won't surprise you to know, not a lot of people in Milford, New Hampshire who look like Jerry Ann. And she was determined. She was determined to see if she could look back in history and go through records and so forth and see if she could find anybody in history who had lived in Milford, New Hampshire, like she was, who looked like her. And she made what can only be described, in archaeology, they would say, a find, a real find. She did, right? She did. Now, if you find a piece of pottery in the desert, that's a find that nobody knew about, except the person whose pot it was. But if you find about a person, there are generally records, as there was for this person, but it doesn't mean that they're well known. In the case of this person, it should have been well known, because the person who she, in a sense, discovered, historians credit her today for making this woman's name more well known. It should have been more well known, because this was a significant person, Harriet E. Wilson. Harriet E. Wilson was a young African-American, early 1800s in Milford. She's born to a young black couple who simply cannot afford another mouth to feed. Just can't afford it. And so, like right out of a movie, right? This infant is swaddled up in blankets and left in a big basket on the porch of a wealthy white family in Milford. Now, the good news is she's taken in by the family, not raised as one of their own, but as their indentured servant. She was a voracious reader, really bright young woman, voracious reader, loved to write, kept a series of journals. And in 1859, Harriet E. Wilson became the first black author to have a novel published in North America. So that's a significant historical achievement. It's a significant first. And Jerry Ann found out about it. And a year later, 2006, Jerry Ann succeeded in 2006 in persuading the town of Milford to establish a memorial right there, that statue to Harriet E. Wilson. That was all Jerry Ann's doing, to struggle to get that story out. And she became the co-founder of the Black Heritage Trail in New Hampshire, because what she discovered in Milford, she began making discoveries all around New Hampshire, right? And today, the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire is like a freedom trail for Black history in New Hampshire. And she today is the executive director of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And there she is. Took a long walk with her one morning through Portsmouth, and another find that she ferreted out. People in Portsmouth certainly weren't familiar with the fact that in the mid-1800s, there were slave auctions in Portsmouth Harbor, as well as Mississippi. So our first pit stop, first diner. Anybody ever been to the Windsor Diner in Windsor, Vermont? So the Windsor Diner is it's an authentic Worcester dining car diner, authentic as they come. And rarity of rarities is Teresa Rhodes, the owner of the Windsor Diner. First of all, she's a rarity because she is one of the few women I've met who own and run their own diner outright. But even more of a rarity, she runs it entirely solo. Now you think for a minute, how many Brotherhood members did we have working the line here this morning, right? A lot of guys, right? A lot of guys. And by the way, delicious. Thank you. Thank you. But it's not easy to run a diner by yourself. So, everybody in a diner at any given moment in time is at a different step in their diner visit, right? Some people are waiting to order. Some people are waiting to eat. Some people are waiting to get their check and leave. Everybody's at a different place. So she's going to deal with all of it. So I was sitting there that morning and I'm watching her and I'm like, what is the trick? She's somehow cooking, getting stuff out, pulling a pencil, getting a check done. She'd fold the check and toss it like a ball. So then you had to unwrap it. No, so I said, I'm sensing something. I said, is this your trick? And I said, no, keep working. But I said, you can't move, right? I haven't seen, she said, that's the trick. She said, I don't move. I do everything I have to do from this spot. Because if I move one time, the eggs burn. So that's the most important thing is the food. I'm not wasting food. So she doesn't move from that spot. And it really hit home to me. Now, fortunately, it looked like the whole counter that morning was all local people, so they understood the directions, right? So she finishes this plate, and it was going down this side of the diner from here, so there were people sitting on. She finishes that plate, she wheels around, she goes, hands up! Yep, like a frisbee. Like a frisbee, guy caught it. Everybody goes back to eating. So the other thing that was great about that visit that morning was Billy Nye. Billy Nye, he had just turned 83. He had recently moved back to Milford, where he grew up, to be closer to his daughter's family. He was doing some house painting, and he knows the Milford Diner from the time he was a little pisher, a little kid, right? A little kid. His mom was a waitress at the Windsor Diner. And he said every single day after school, he'd put his book bag down right there. He'd sit on that stool right there, and he'd start doing his homework, and his mom would bring him a glass of milk and a slice of pie. And then he moved away. So he comes back more than 50 years later, and he's telling me all this. I said, wait, Billy, time out. I don't understand something right off the bat here. It's killing me. He said, what? I said, well, this stool in front of you here is your stool. Yeah, that was my stool. Right. So that's your stool for sure. And like, if the diner goes away, they're going to have to bronze that stool and put it out on the sidewalk with a plaque. That's your stool, right? Yeah. How come you're not sitting in it? He said, that's a good question. He said, so I came back about 50, after 50 years, I walked into the diner and I made right for that stool. And then just as I was going to sit down, I said to myself, Billy, maybe it's time you graduated to the next stool. And he did. And he's a graduate now. Resilience. I think that resilience, there's something in the New England DNA that, that speaks to resilience, don't you think? I mean, for the weather alone, if nothing else, you do not have to be weather resilient in San Diego. Okay? You just don't. You do here. Farming, fishing, anything people do somehow has taken a special level of resilience in New England. I think it's in our DNA in a way, And one of the things, though, that I often think of in terms of resilience in New England is actually the only non-human thing that I'm addressing, although humans are certainly involved with it, and that is New England's mill towns. Don't you think? You know how resilient New England's mill towns have had to be, and the mill buildings themselves? I mean, these are towns and cities, whether we're talking about Lawrence, Lowell, Haverhill, North Adams, Woonsocket, Pawtucket, Lewiston, Maine, Biddeford, Maine. These are cities everywhere that share largely the same story, really. I mean, they may have produced different things, they have different populations, they have different immigrant combinations, but they all really share the same story. They once knew great prosperity in the early 19th century. They knew great prosperity, and then that went away. It went away when the mill companies, out of greed, severed their ties to their supposed community and went in search of cheaper wages. And they found that in the American South. And when they could find even cheaper wages overseas, they went overseas, right? Mill towns can't leave in search of anything. The town stays. The mill buildings stay. And the mill buildings, by the way, were not buildings that were meant to be torn down. Because all of those towns, every single mill town and city that I just mentioned, every single one shares the same story in that by the time you get to the late 60s, the 70s, the early 80s, every single town and city would have given anything they could to get rid of those mill buildings, because those mill buildings, once abandoned, were nothing but targets for arson, drugs, and crime, right? If I had a nickel for every time some mayor of some New England mill town said some version of, I would have blown up that thing myself if I could have gotten away with it. In one case, a guy did try, but also happened to be the chief of police, so got into some gray areas legally. But anyway, but they would have loved to get rid of them. They couldn't get rid of them. They couldn't get rid of them. And now, those same mayors have told me again and again some version of the same thing too, which is that I would have blown that thing up myself 30 years ago. Today, I feel like I should get down and kiss the ground that mill building stands on. You take Haverhill. Haverhill was once the center of America's shoe industry, had textile mills as well. Today, Haverhill is a bedroom community for Boston. That would have been inconceivable 40 years ago. Less inconceivable. But that mill stock, that stock of mill buildings, not only provided public-private partnerships for investment opportunities with business, but residences. It's a bedroom community for Boston because it had a huge stock of what are now condos and apartments for people who commute to Boston for work. So that's also replicated all over, because by the 90s, the national economy finally turned in a way that made it possible to attract development for these abandoned mill buildings. And that's absolutely the case in Biddeford. In Biddeford, the reinvention, the reimagining, the reemerging happened in a way that is really dramatic. It's really dramatic, not because of necessarily of what they have created now, which is stunning, but equally stunning is what they endured before that. In Biddeford, it was crushing. In Biddeford, it was deeply humiliating. Just ask Alan Cassavant. Alan Cassavant, fifth generation French-Canadian kid, grew up in Biddeford, eventually became a teacher, eventually became Biddeford's longest serving mayor. But long before that, as a kid growing up in Biddeford, he remembered the boom times. He remembered walking with his parents in the mid-late 60s down Main Street in Biddeford on a Saturday night. All the shops, restaurants, bars, everything open till 10 o'clock at night. People flush with cash, everybody been paid the day before. And then he remembers the 80s. He remembers the 80s when most of those same places open till 10 o'clock at night. Most of them weren't still open, period. Boarded up, drugs, crime, massive unemployment. Once there was nearly 100% unemployment. 28% unemployment in Biddeford, Maine in 1979. That's what happens when the mills close down, right? So he remembered all that. He remembered that, but you know, the other thing that mill towns endure that we don't often think about, just like vulnerable human lives, mill towns and cities become vulnerable places when they are desperate for revenue. And things are cited, right? Cite, S-I-T-E, in places like that would never be cited in Framingham or Weston or Dover. Never. Like a solid waste incinerator in the middle of the town. That's what happened. And it was so ugly, so humiliating for people. Like Alan talks about how he'd get up in the morning to go to high school, and you would smell, and you knew what they were incinerating that day by what it smelled like, right? And he said it was humiliating to know that the only reason that's there is because we're down on our luck. So the fact that he became the mayor who presided over what many people in Maine today call the Biddescence in Biddeford is so perfect. One of these kids of Biddeford who knew what it was like to feel utterly broken and humiliated by what had befallen their city got to preside over the restoration of their city. He's the guy who people insisted had to be the one to push the plunger down and bring that incinerator down in 1990. And he did, with pleasure, with glee. And he has sought people. He became mayor after he had been a teacher. He's not a businessman. He's not a consultant. But he knows how to attract people like that. He's one of those people who just has that irrepressible optimism about him. And you need optimism to be resilient, because the opposite is to give up, right? So he was able to attract wonderful people, investors and business folks, public service folks. He was able to bring that wonderful ratio of public-private partnerships to bear on the huge mill stock they had. They have attracted pharma. They have attracted tech companies. They have attracted restaurants. There's a couple of great brew pubs now in those mill buildings. There's a great museum. There are condos and apartments. They have brought back and restored one of the gems of Biddeford, the City Theater. The City Theater, so many New England towns have the equivalent of what the City Theater was. These were often Victorian era wooden buildings. Frequently, they would house something municipal like the town hall, public library, and so forth. But there was always some space that was a community gathering space. There would be dances, there would be lectures. Charles Dickens spoke at the City Theater in the 1840s. But by the time my friend Tim Sample played the City Theater with his band, the Dubious Brothers, you realize we're all dating ourselves merely by laughing at that. I spoke about a month ago. I was doing a speaking. Most of the audience were fifth graders, and a couple of old farts. You know, we laughed at the Dubious Brothers. You know, and they were like, "I don't get it." It's a terrible day. So he remembers playing with his band in the early 1970s, and he's pointing right there because the City Theater has been magnificently restored, and he couldn't get over it. He was like, that wall right there, the wallpaper was literally rolling down from the ceiling. So he said it was fun on our break. We'd like try to jump up, and he's tall. We'd try to jump up and grab a little bit and see if we could get the whole roll to come down. And a year after he played there, the City Theater was condemned by the city. A year after that, they blew out the back wall, and they installed a couple of big, industrial garage doors, and the DPW was storing road salt on the floor of the City Theater. That's humiliating. That's humiliating, right? All of that gone. They were able to establish Alan was able to establish a wonderful Friends of the City Theater, public, private. They were able to fully restore it. Another great restoration is the Palace Diner. Another great diner story. The Palace Diner in Biddeford, anybody ever been? Oh my goodness. Did you like it? When were you there? Were you there within the last few years? You were. Good food, right? Expensive food. Everyone's a critic. You know what, though? As far as I'm concerned, it's worth every penny and more. First of all, the Palace Diner is my favorite type of diner, which is a diner that's been closed and saved and reopened. And the story behind its being saved is great because the Palace Diner was simply where you ate. Everybody who worked the mills worked their way in and out of the Palace Diner at one point during a 24-hour day. But then it closed, and it was closed for about 5 years when Greg Mitchell and Chad Conley looked at it. Now, these two guys were foodies out of Portland, Maine. Now, if you know Portland, Maine, it's become a real food mecca, right? So they were both chefs, wanted to open up their own restaurant. So in Portland today, if you're not starting to put your name on a deed, if you're not starting with high six figures, never mind what you're going to need after that to hire up, you're not opening up a restaurant in Portland, Maine today. So they were priced out. They realized that. Somebody told them about this diner in Biddeford, Maine. They were like, we're not diner guys. I mean, we love diners, but we don't cook diner food. They said, why don't you go look at it? Just look at it. Maybe you can do something with it and look at it. So they did. They came down to look at it. So our friend, Alan Cassavant, the mayor, had a great idea. So because he was mayor, he was able to requisition a couple of school buses and fill them with volunteers. They didn't say a word. But see, there's a little parking lot that looks out from these windows, the front of the diner right here, right? So the buses pull up, volunteers get out while Chad and Greg are inside checking out the diner. And they all had these big signs that all said the exact same thing, and they didn't say a word. They just held them up. It just said, please buy me. And it worked. They bought it. And the thing is, why I asked about the food, they are doing something. So they're really good chefs, right? Which you don't necessarily get. You do not generally get at a diner. But they were committed to reopening this gem in this community, and they were committed to the challenge. This is also resilience. They were committed to the challenge. What can we do with our knowledge as chefs and our skills with a diner? They're smart. They totally understood. That's one way to ruin a diner, right? No, it's not that you're not doing good food. But very rare is the diner customer who's coming in to check out your trout almondine, right? So you have to be true to that. And they were, and they are. So what I love about it is that, yes, it's a little more expensive than your average diner, but you're not getting average diner food, right? So they do stuff that is all around the edges and it's subtle, so it doesn't overwhelm anything. You get your blueberry pancakes, you get your Vermont maple syrup, and you get your, and you're eating it, and it's like, it's something. There's something different, and it's like, no, it's not bad. I can't put my finger on it, but it's like a little glazed coconut and creme fraiche. Who would have thought, And who doesn't like challah? But who's ever seen a 3-decker tuna club with challah that has also got this little thing going on there? It is so delicious. I would have stayed all day, but I would have exploded at a certain point. So great in terms of that resilience. And sometimes you find resilience in a place you just would never expect to find it. I mean, look, 10 years ago, I never would have attached the term resilience to the ski industry, but then climate change has made resilience have everything to do, but that's not what this is about. That's just ancillary. This is a community that shouldn't have a ski area. It's a ski hill. You're not going to confuse this place with Stratton or Killington. But that's the whole point, because you need a lot of money to ski at a place like Stratton and Killington. You need hundreds of dollars a day to ski today at Killington or Stratton or Stowe or Vail. Hundreds of dollars a day as one single individual. You want to take a family skiing to Vail, Colorado? You want to forget the airfare. You want to take a family skiing today to a place like Stowe, Killington? I would say for a single day, which, by the way, skiers today are making it almost impossible to ski for a single day. More greed. You better be prepared to have anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for a day. So that's not expensive. That's obscene. And I say that as a lifelong skier. I love to ski. I love to ski. It's one of the very few things I'm comfortable saying I can do reasonably well. My wife might have other things. But I grew up, I started when I was 5 years old. I love it. I still am lucky enough to be able to do it a couple of times a winter if I'm lucky. I feel very, very lucky and grateful that I've been able to introduce and allow my children to ski, my daughters, who also love it. That's not the story of most people. In fact, it's the story of fewer and fewer Americans, because fewer and fewer people can afford to ski, period. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of that and the history of that much as I would love to, because I loathe the ski industry. I love skiing. I just loathe the ski industry. But that's not what this is. This is everything that what I just described is not. And it all has to do with the community where it is. East Corinth, Vermont is poor. So why is there a ski hill there? East Corinth, Vermont is in the little southwest corner of Orange County, Vermont. Orange County, Vermont has absolutely zero in common with the other two famous orange counties in America. And I'm not talking about palm trees. I'm talking about money, right? So East Corinth is in an area of Vermont that is very poor. I think when people think of Vermont, they often think of, among other things, but when they think of demographics, rightfully, many people think that there are real pockets of affluence, real affluence in Vermont. There are. You don't get a place like Stowe and Killington or Stratton if you don't have money. Now, some of that's coming in from outside. Some of that came in from outside to ski is now there permanently, because post-COVID, a lot of people left the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area and moved to Vermont. So there is real affluence in Vermont. Less well known, there is real poverty in Vermont. I'm not talking about middle. I'm talking about poverty line or below poverty in Vermont. East Corinth is one of those places. So this is not a place where parents would be. These people are trying to come up with money to buy food, medicine, a roof over their heads, heat for the winter, which is a survival thing. in Vermont, right? So they're not spending hundreds of dollars days skiing. They're not spending thousands of dollars for ski equipment. That's just not going to happen. So how did it happen here? There was a ski hill here in East Corinth going back to the 1930s. In fact, the rope tow today at Northeast Slopes is now today the oldest continuously operating ski lift of any kind in North America. So there was a ski place, and then it was closed for a long time. And when a group in the community decided that they wanted to reopen this in recent history, they had to wrestle with, how do we do this? How do we do this? This is not a community that can generally afford to ski. So how do we do this? Then they looked at all kinds of different possibilities and all kinds of different pricing structures. And then one day somebody said, you know what? Enough. Why don't we all put our money where our mouth is, our work where our money is, and why don't we make it free? And why don't we do all the jobs that will be necessary to make it run? And they did, making Northeast Slopes today one of three, count them, three nonprofit ski areas in America. That to me is the ultimate oxymoron. Forget jumbo shrimp. Nonprofit ski area? That's like crazy, right? But that's what it is. Now, if you have money, you are absolutely encouraged to contribute. And nearly everybody does, even families that are skiing for free, which is quite moving because they realize what this place represents for the community. So if you can make a contribution, make a contribution. If you're a family or kid that can't come up with the money to ski, you know, there's no stigma to it. Nobody knows who's doing what. If you need ski equipment, I love it. The ski library, a school bus that is bursting with ski equipment that's been donated from ski shops all over Vermont, pulls up. You need equipment? You walk up to the ski bus, you get your equipment. I saw at the end of the day that we were shooting there, it just was one of the warmest things I've ever seen. It made me feel just so warm inside again about the idea of community. Little kid, end of the day. So in Vermont, they often do, skiing, go to a skier for their phys ed during the week. So the school will get out at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon and they'll go to a ski hill. So the kids in that area come to a Northeast Slope. A lot of kids don't have skis. So there's a kid bringing his skis up back to the ski bus. And a lady leans out and she says, what are you doing? He said, I'm done. She said, you going to ski next week? He said, I hope so. I said, all right, so why don't you hang on to those? He said, okay. And then as he's walking away, she said, hey, do you think you'll want to ski next year? He said, I guess so. She said, well, why don't you hold on to them? He said, well, she said, no, those are yours. That kid turned around. The look on he looked like he was carrying a load of gold bullion. Okay? The first skis he'd ever owned. And he lives in Vermont. This shouldn't be the case, but it was, right? So that's what this is all about. This has a board just like a shul, right? It has a board. Everybody does their job, different times. Everybody wears different hats at different times. And I cycles through. When I was there, when I visited, it was my good fortune that Wade Pearson, it was his job to be chief cook and bottle washer, the big macher on the mountain that day, making sure that everything was working and working well. And I'm looking at the rope tow where he was, and I'm watching this thing. This thing, I've never seen a rope moving this fast. The rope on a rope tow, there aren't many left, but the friction burns a big, big rut in the snow, right? And so this thing was down about 3 feet in the snow, and I thought, I'm going to have to fish that out of it because I have my skis. I was going to do a little run down the mountain. And I thought, first of all, I'm going to have to fish that out. And then I remembered that there's a trick to a rope tow because I hadn't ridden one since I was a teenager. And I knew that, God forbid, you never just pick up the rope and grab it because it will hurtle you about 10 feet in the air. And this is only a few years ago, so I wasn't sure I would physically survive that. So I said, wait, what do you have running this rope tow? What, do you have a jet engine in there? He said, no, not a jet engine. Let me show you. Just a little 73 Dodge Dart with a slant 6 that he obsesses over. The car doesn't look like much, but I swear to God, you could eat off the inside of that hood there. It was like, so That's running the lift. So you might wonder, how much did I spend? How much did I spend for a day of skiing at Northeast Slopes? You know, this coming season in Colorado, I can't remember the name of it now, it's just as well. But there is a skier in Colorado that this coming season will break the $300 a day for a lift ticket. Right? So how much did I spend? I didn't spend $20. I spent $10.50. I spent $10.50 for a lift ticket. I spent $6 for a delicious nor'easter burger in their lodge. I said lodge because it's a little garage. Probably from where I'm standing, maybe to that wall and the divider this way to the stage. So like that. It's like a little garage. There's no tables and chairs because nobody could actually sit down and get up. So people are just kind of swaying while I thought it was like, this is what it would be like if everybody was eating lunch on a Subway at the same time, right? So that's all it cost. I donated my skis. So that was added, but that was the best donation I ever made in my life. And it really restored my faith. Forget skiing. It restored my faith in that magic word once again, community. So I often think, and I know everyone in this room, especially, I think that humor for Jews is an absolute kind of resilience. Always has been. Always has been. How many jokes do we share as Jews that are about very serious things? Like, you know, Moses getting through the, you know, if you'd only taken a right turn instead of a left. Right? You would have had all the oil. Anyway, I think humor in general is a very major part of being resilient. Becky Rule is one of the funniest New Englanders I've ever met. Not Jewish, but I always tell her, you really could have been, because she just has a certain kind of sense of humor that I just so relate to. And she's very funny. We have had so many discussions over the years about very New England things. Like, for instance, when do you become a native in a small New England town, right? You know, and you may laugh in Framingham. That's no small deal in a place like, oh, I don't know, Duxbury. You know, when do you become a native? As if there was such a thing for someone who, you know, came on a schlipping boat in the 1620s. There've been a few people there before them. You know, the famous, speaking of Jewish humor, you know, the famous joke, what did Samoset say when he saw the pilgrims arriving on the horizon? Hey, there goes the neighborhood. So we had a great conversation one day about when you become a native in a small New England town. And it's not a small thing. And I said, I'll tell you, I said, I got one for you, Becky. So this is true. So years and years ago, I was in Waldoboro, Maine at another diner there. Anybody ever been to Moody's? Moody's is a great diner in Waldoboro, Maine on Route 1. Anyway, I was looking for somebody to talk to. A lot of tourists were around that day because it was in the fall. And I'm looking around, I'm looking for somebody who looked like they might have been to, you know, Moody's when they were kids. And I saw this guy sitting at the counter. And I said, oh, there's my guy. There is my guy. He had a seed store hat on, his coveralls. I always make sure to check, if I'm looking for a local, to check their shoes. Because he had his boots on, but he also had like fresh gunk on his boots. So I knew he'd been working outside that morning, right? So I said, here's my guy. So I sat down, I introduced myself. I asked him if I could chat a little bit. He said, sure. I said, so I take it you probably grew up in Waldoboro and been to the diner. He said, yes, sir. I said, so you're a native of Waldoboro? He said, no, sir. You're not a native? No, sir. How long have you lived here? May I ask how old you are? 93. How long have you lived here? I see. 92 and a half years. And you're not a native? No, sir. So I told Becky this. I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There's not some sort of like honorary native status that is automatically conferred on this guy. She said, it's very simple when you become a native. It's very simple. I don't care whether it's Duxbury or Waldoboro. It's very simple when you automatically become a native in a small New England town. I said, when's that? She said, when the last person in that town who knows when you move there dies, you're a native. So her thing is all about These New Englandisms, all about that. Most of her humor is all about that. I love her most recent book is called Heading for the Rhubarb. Okay? And it's wonderful. It's very funny because it's a glossary of outdated New Englandisms, right? She like tells you what these were once used, and most of them, with some exceptions, are no longer used, like heading for the rhubarb. So heading for the rhubarb comes from the fact that rhubarb, I'm not a horse person, but rhubarb is apparently really, really bad for horses. Like it won't kill them. It is not good for them, right? So it's like if you saw your horse heading down for the rhubarb, you want to get down there and get that horse back fast, right? But over time, right? So after like the later 1800s and 1900s, over time, it began to be used to just refer to anybody who's kind of heading for trouble, right? So I love the example she has in her book. She says, you might have a couple of old friends who are sitting around the general store in the morning. They're sitting on the front porch drinking their coffee, and they see another friend of theirs walking up the street. And he's walking arm in arm with his new lady friend. And one of them says to the other one, he is heading for the rhubarb with that one. Heading for the rhubarb with that one. I'll tell you now. So you want to try your hand at this one is still used. This is a total New Englandism that wouldn't be understood anywhere else, like bubbler, You want to try your hand? All right. The word is Adelphia. Now, first I thought, is it a place? No. I'm looking at the word. I said, Becky, use it in a sentence. So she said, easy. I might go next door to Barrington, to Caleb's General Store. I might pick up a few things, have my basket. I bring my basket up to the front counter. And Tina at the counter might say to me, all right, hon, Adelphia? Apparently, it's some sort of intelligence test because I failed. I was like, oh, you mean like, will that do for you? All right. So lastly, to end on a nice up note, the whole concept of triumph. A couple of quick stories, one of which is my favorite of all time, that have to do with triumph. Sometimes before you can succeed, you have to fail. Before you can triumph, you have to hit bottom. Unfortunately, when failure involves drug abuse, failure is usually fatal. So it almost was for Larson Ojala, wonderful friend today. Larson today is married, has his own concrete company in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire. He was born in Fitzwilliam, which along with Jaffrey are one of the two towns that is straddled by Mount Monadnock. It is, bless you. Today has his own concrete company in Fitzwilliam, lovely wife, two great little kids. They hike and travel all over, but that was not the case. As a kid, Larson Ojala used to run up and down Mount Monadnock. Run. He would make it his thing that he would run up to the top and down. Most people take 3.25 hours on average. So he would run up and down. By the time he was 20, he couldn't even run up a flight of stairs. Because by the time he was 12, he was abusing drugs. By the time he was 13, that abuse involved heroin and fentanyl. I asked him, I'll bet you have friends who didn't make it, like you did. And he said, yeah. I said, how many would you say? He started counting on his hand. When he got to the second hand, I said, just stop. Stop. It's like too hard to actually see somebody ticking off once you've stopped at 5 friends who are dead to drugs. And that's where he was headed. That's where he was headed. Now, he is one of the lucky ones, and he knows it only too well that he didn't become a statistic. He was lucky that, first of all, as has to happen, he decided that he was sick of his life. He was sick of what it had become, and he wanted to change. That's the first thing that has to happen. What the rest doesn't have to happen, but it did, and he's also very lucky that he had a loving, supportive family that was there to help him. And he had a wonderful mentor who got involved, who was himself one of these extreme hikers who runs up and down mountain peaks. And Larson, by the way, made that his recovery model, that one day I am going to run up and down Mount Monadnock one more time. If it's one more time, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And he did. Today, he speaks to kids all over New Hampshire about drugs. And in 2021, Larson Ojala set a new world record. He didn't run once, 17 summits in 24 hours. That's running. That's not walking, hiking. 3.25 to 3.5 hours is the average hike up and down Mount Monadnock. He did that 17 times in 24 hours. And the next year, he did it again and broke his own record. 18 summits in 24 hours. And you know, he did that over a Saturday and a Sunday night. And when I knew he'd be down on Sunday morning, I texted him and I said, Larson, you did it, man. You are running free. And he texted me back a little while later and he said, thanks, Ted. Next time, you do it with me. And I like to think I set my own world's record in the number of laughing emojis that I texted back. And lastly, my favorite story, my very favorite story. So, you know, I always think that we are blessed. We are lucky and blessed. If at one point in our life we meet somebody who is, I use this term very advisedly because I almost never use it, but someone who we think of, because there's no other word that quite fits it, saint-like, right? You think of, you know, we Jews don't think in those terms, but you know what I mean, that those qualities that we would mentally attribute to that, you know, some sort of natural empathy, intelligence, quietness, gentleness, tenderness, grace, right? All of which is Steve Brosnahan. Steve, very soft-spoken, lovely, lovely person. And, you know, he began something that today has become a real phenomenon. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Goodnight Lights phenomenon in Providence, Rhode Island. The simplest way to describe it, because it's sort of indescribable unless you see it happening. The simplest way to describe it is that Steve found a way for the entire city of Providence, Rhode Island, every single night for 1 minute to say goodnight to its vulnerable population, most vulnerable, the children who are being treated at Hasbro Children's Hospital for cancer and leukemia. Every night for 1 minute, the city has found a way, Steve found the way, to say goodnight. How does that work? Well, so Steve likes to joke that he works at Hasbro Children's. He likes to joke that he's the lowest paid member of the medical staff at Hasbro Children's. I quickly remind him when he does that is very much in part of the fact that you don't hold a medical degree, Steve, which is true. But he's also 100% correct when he says, I'm also the only member of the medical staff who children are actually happy to see at their door during the day. Because when Steve arrives, he's a cartoonist. And when he arrives at their doorway, minus a white coat or a stethoscope, but instead big bags of markers and crayons, paints, huge sketch pads, these kids know that for the next hour, they will be transported away from this place that is not home, that is alien and frightening, away from this place where other people arrive at the door during the day and come in and prick and prod and schedule tests and whisper things to their parents that starts making them cry. And they will be transported for an hour. And about 10, 12 years ago, Steve had become very friendly with a young kid who was about to be released from the hospital. So he wanted to find some way of giving this kid kind of a special goodbye. And he's talking to the kid in his room, and he looks out the window, and he realizes that the kid's room faces right out the front of the hospital. And Steve rides his bike to and from the hospital every day. So he realized that he will be wheeling his bike out in view of the kid's room when he leaves that evening. And he said to the kid, he said, you know what? Tonight at 8:30, I want you to look right down there, and you're going to have a surprise. And sure enough, at 8:30 that night, when it was dark, Steve wheels his bike out. He detaches his high-powered bike light, and he flashed it up at the kid's room, on and off, on and off. He waved, and he turned to go, and you hear him tell it. He said it had rained that afternoon, so there were little puddles all over the ground. And you know, on asphalt, when there's puddles in water, it reflects light. And he said he saw some light flashing, and he realized his flashlight was off. And he looked up at the room. The kid was flashing his room light on and off. So he had just instinctively realized, I can respond the same way. And Steve said it was like the biggest aha moment of his whole life. He said, I realized I could do this for every kid in the hospital. And then he looked out at the city and he said, wait a minute. The whole city could do this. And that became his ask for the next 2.5 years. He went around to every single business and institution in the city of Providence that faced, and then those that didn't even face the hospital. He went to every hotel, national chains, you know, Marriott, the Hilton. He went to every hotel. He went to every university, Providence College, Brown. He went to every single restaurant, every bar, every coffee house, every business. He went to the police departments, the fire departments. He went to the tug company on the Providence River, and he asked them all the same thing. 1 minute. That's all I'm asking. 1 minute. You don't have to hire people. You can put it on a light on a timer. 1 minute at 8:30 every night. Flash your lights. Did everybody get on board right away? Of course not. Are they now? Today? Never mind every single business I just mentioned. Today, it would be hard to find any major business building in Providence, Rhode Island that does not do good night lights every night at 8:30. Today, they call it the magic minute. The kids don't stay in their own rooms anymore. The hospital outfitted the top floor as a solarium now with these big circled windows, so the kids go up there. They all have their own flashlights to feel like they're responding to people, saying good night. The police, fire involved every single night. It's an amazing thing. And so about 5 or 6 years ago now, I've been hearing about it. I was like, I gotta do this story. I gotta do this story. So I got in touch with Steve, and I said, Steve, we introduced myself, and I told him we'd love to do this story. And he said, we'd love to have you. So we planned how to do this. And then I said, before we were getting off the phone, I said, one other thing, Steve. I said, could you connect us with a young patient at the hospital now who really loves good night lights? Because we'd love to experience that with them, through one of the kids. And he said, let me see what I can do. Before the day was over, he called me back. I said, I have the perfect patient for you. I said, great. And he did, in fact, have the perfect patient. Abby Waldron was 10 years old. Sorry. Abby Waldron was 10 years old when we met. She was fighting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The prognosis wasn't clear. She lost her waist-length hair. She was doing chemo. But here's the thing. There were a lot of people around that day. The camera there, does that, and people, what's going on? But also the medical staff. Anyway, her family, her parents, their friends, people going in and out. All the people that were in and around that day. The patient, Abby, was the only one who had a smile on her face the whole day. And about 5 o'clock, we had to take a break, and I said, we're gonna take a little break, Abby. She said, "You're gonna stay for good night lights." I said, "What do you think we're doing here, Abby? What do you think we're doing here?" I said, "We're not only staying. I'm sitting next to you, and I assume you're gonna save me a seat." And she did, and I did sit next to her. And Steve had gotten some other fire companies to come with cranes and ladder trucks, and it was an amazing display that night. Apparently, people had seen it was like this was like nothing we had seen yet. Abby said that was the Chronicle show that aired. You can see the little CVB identity thing in the corner, and she said, "Oh my God, This is like the grand finale tonight. And a year later, that was April and May 2019, that Chronicle show won an Emmy Award. And the only reason I bring that up is that the very next thing that morning, Sunday morning, I called up Steve Brosnahan and I called up Abby's family and I said, can you folks meet me in front of the hospital at 10 o'clock on Monday morning? Because I have something for you. And they said, yeah, did. And they did, and we met, and there is Steve, and the reward that to the people who really earned it, now me, and there is Abby, now 16 and 6 years cancer-free. Thank you very much. So,
Hi, Ted. Thanks for the talk. First of all, my name is Donna.
Hi.
And I'm thinking about how in the 80s, a lot of my neighbors worked at Digital in Maynard. So what do you know about, I haven't been in Maynard in a while, did they suffer a similar?
they did for a time. So the Digital building in Maynard was, anybody more familiar than me? I mean, I know you do. 12 years. Yeah, it took a while to reoccupy that building. Yeah. So it went through the same thing. Now that's already a generation removed industry-wise from the textile industry. That was the tech industry. Yeah, that was the 80s. Yeah. So, but in some ways, though, it did mirror the same experience because it was largely vacant for a while, and slowly by slowly, they were able to preoccupy the building. Yeah, in Maynard had been there. Well, that was the Assabet River. Right, that was the Assabet River, which today, another community gathering place that I always tick off, I didn't before, is rail trails that communities invest in and build and create for themselves. And the Assabet Rail Trail is a wonderful rail trail that runs right by and through Maine. Yeah.
This is just for information.
Yeah.
Last Wednesday we were in Killington, and I asked, what's a
Lift ticket
price this coming winter for an adult? $200.
Exactly. And you know what? 200 is not even the highest in New England. Can you believe it? I'll tell you a funny story. So $200 for a lift ticket for one day at Killington this year. And you know what they're doing now? All those places, they're trying to get you to buy a multi-day pass, right? So what they really want you to do is shell out $800 to ski for 3 days instead of one day. I tell you, here's a frame of reference. So I tell you, I grew up skiing. My parents didn't ski, but I had an uncle, a favorite uncle, who skied, whose son, my first cousin, was my age, right? So I went with them almost every weekend through the winter. So this must have been maybe the late 60s, 68, 69, 70, somewhere in there. And he had a place at Mount Sunapee, Newbury, New Hampshire. True story. I'm standing behind him. So it must have been the first time out skiing that season because he hadn't seen what the new lift prices were, right? So I'm standing right behind him. at the lift counter, right? And so I don't know what he's saying. I don't know what the guy's telling him. But he all of a sudden, he's talking to the guy, and I'm right behind him. He's a big guy. Right behind him. And all of a sudden, he steps back like this. And so I literally fell backward because he had just stepped back. And he said, "Are you kidding me? $12.50 for a day?" $12.50, I'm pretty sure won't buy you a soft drink.
For your information, the section called Saxonville is a community that is a shining example of what we talked about.
That was a mill community.
Roxbury Carpet moved from Roxbury into Framingham and left in the 50s to go south because of the union issues. And that's been recycled into many businesses, and the Saxonville people have been putting together what they used to be.
And those buildings are still there. Yeah. Now, next.
I'll be 91 in 2 more days.
Mazel tov.
So the brain is still functioning, but I want to ask you, what was the name of that lunch cart there that way back we were talking about?
The lunch cart.
Oh, well, there was a red thing there. What's the name of that? I forgot the name.
The diner?
Yeah, the diner.
The Windsor Diner.
That's it.
The Windsor
I
Diner.
do remember that.
Yeah?
The best part there was the bread crust and the onions. The bread crust and the onions. That's what I remember. I'm kind of different.
Well, I'll tell you, well, for one thing, your memory's not going. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. Good for you. Good for you, and happy birthday in advance. Tell me your question. What is my most favorite town in New England? I was going to say, what kind of an idiot do you think I am? It's always been Framingham. It's a city, that's true. So Framingham is my favorite city. My favorite town. Well, I mean, look, I can't entirely, leave out my hometown where I grew up, which is Winthrop, or as I like to refer to it, the charming little seaside town at the end of runway 27L. Winthrop is certainly up there. There's a little town in New Hampshire called Harrisville. Speaking of mills, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Harrisville. There's a wonderful general store in Harrisville. But Harrisville was a thriving mill village like Saxonville, right? I mean, really, I guess it's its own town. It might be more of a part in some ways of Peterborough and that area. But it's up in the hills there. And if you ever have a chance to go, it's a great concept because Harrisville, New Hampshire has been brought back. And in some ways, if you look at it quickly, you'd say, well, it's like a living museum. But it's not a museum. What they did was, I've never seen anybody do this. They decided they were going to try to save the town, bring tourists in, but also create jobs, right, that would pay for everything. And they've replicated doing the things that were once made in Harrisville, made there again. Are there other things that, like motorcycles, that were not made in Harrisville? Sure. But they're making textile there again, right? The general store that had closed down is a real working general store again, right? The school, I think it's great that they did that. It had all fallen apart, but it's a great concept. They said, we're going to bring back the things that were once made here, and it's not going to be like a museum. It's going to be real jobs, creating real income and bringing in real revenue. And they did. And in that sense, it's absolutely one of my favorite towns. One of my favorite towns. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
So I grew up in Winthrop.
Oh, what part?
Shore Drive.
What part of Shore Drive?
Seafoam Avenue. Where did you grow up?
Seafoam Avenue. My bubby lived on Tewksbury.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, we know each other, my God. Seafoam, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you remember some of those big nor'easters when the water would come right down the street, right?
Our basement was always flooded.
Of course.
And I remember this is when I was in high school, the guy I was dating, we decided to let's drive up the end of the street.
Yeah.
And
see if you can stand there when the waves are coming over?
Oh, yeah.
That was your first
We were in the car. The waves came over.
That often doesn't end well.
We never backed down the street so far in our lives.
Isn't that funny? Did you go to Winthrop High?
Yeah, I graduated in 60.
Was Duplin the principal then? Yeah. Wow.
Wonderful memory.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I just spoke in Winthrop. I always do with a new book, and I was just out there a couple of weeks ago. That's a small world, right?
It is, because I know he's been on Chronicle. I know he takes
Of
pictures.
course, he's a good friend of mine.
I didn't know you were good friends.
Yes.
Well,
Oh, ask Mark. Tell Mark next time you talk to him that we talked about him.
Yeah, we're in touch a lot.
Oh, that's great. Mark's a
Thank
great
you.
guy. What a wonderful photographer.
Oh,
Oh my goodness, he's so good.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk Winthrop sometime. Yes.
I'm from Winthrop. I grew up in Winthrop.
Stop!
When were you born in Winthrop? I mean, how long did you live there? From what
You don't have
year to what?
age.
I don't mean age.
When was I born? 56. But I
You-
wasn't born in Winthrop. I was
Oh.
born at Beth Israel.
When did you? That's right. The Winthrop Hospital was.
It's gone now.
That's right. It was gone.
Right. But where did you grow up?
I grew up. I wasn't like. I grew up down the center. Plummer Ave,
Sure.
Lincoln Street, then Plummer Ave.
course.
Do you remember Ham's Restaurant?
Of course I remember Hams.
My grandfather.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, those of you not from, wait, raise your hand if you're not from Winter. I gotta tell you, and my Winter friends here will absolutely bear this out. How many years and years can you go without running into anybody who's ever from Winter, right? Right? This is uncanny to have 3 or 4 people from Winter in the same room. Uncanny. Thank you very much for having.
Thank you, Ted.